Assalamualaikum, my name is Arfat and welcome to a brand new video. In today's video, I'd like to share with you a read from John J. Collins' book, Jewish Wisdom in the Hellenistic Age. This is by Westminster John Knox Press. This is page 46. The title is Wisdom in Sirach. Ben Sirach. Ben Sira's understanding of wisdom is thematized in the series of wisdom poems that punctuate the book. The opening poem strikes a note that is characteristic of Sirach. All wisdom is from the Lord. By implication, any wisdom that repudiates the Lord, the God of Israel, is not true wisdom, and so Sirach signals his loyalty to his ancestral tradition. But conversely, whatever is true wisdom is from the Lord, wherever it is found. This passage sets wisdom in the context of creation. In his reminiscence of Job 28, in its insistence on the unfathomable mysteries, the height of heaven, the breadth of the earth, the abyss, and wisdom, more clearly than the Hebrew text of Proverbs, but in agreement with the Greek, Sirach states that God created wisdom. This passage is not extant in Hebrew. More positively than Job, Sirach says that God poured her wisdom out upon all his works, upon all the living according to his gift. He lavished her upon those who love him. Sirach sets no restriction at the outset on where such people may be found. In principle, at least, wisdom is poured out over all creation. This passage is followed and qualified by another poem on the fear of the Lord. This motif recurs over 60 times throughout the book. Sirach repeats the dictum of Proverbs that to fear the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. It is also the fullness of wisdom, the crown of wisdom, the root of wisdom. While Sirach stops short of an outright equation, it would seem that fear of the Lord is a virtual synonym for wisdom. Like wisdom, it gives gladness and joy and long life. If wisdom is identified so closely with fear of the Lord, it is not only a matter of understanding, but also of moral disposition. Fear of the Lord entails patience, discipline, trust, humility, and sincerity. It is primarily an attitude of reverence for God and respect for received tradition. And as such, it is a constitutive of wisdom. It is constitutive of wisdom. One manifestation of the fear of the Lord is the observance of the commandments. If you desire wisdom, keep the commandments, and the Lord will lavish her upon you. For the fear of the Lord is wisdom and discipline. Fidelity and humility are his delight. In view of the eventual identification of wisdom with the Torah of Moses, the commandments are presumably those found in that book. In fact, Ben Sira often echoes the injunctions of the Decalogue, the Ten Commandments. For example, to honor your parents, and the social laws of Deuteronomy. For example, giving charity towards the poor, right? He pays scant attention to the ritual commandments of Leviticus. The observance is arguably taken for granted. We may compare the attitude of Philo of Alexandria, who was far more strongly inclined to spiritualization than Ben Sira, but still faulted those who neglected the literal observance of the laws, and argued that Jews should be stewards without reproach, and let go nothing that is part of the custom fixed by divinely empowered men greater than those of our time. Sirach's injunction to keep the commandments should probably be understood in a similar spirit, to extend even to matters that were not at the center of his interest. Compare his position on tithes and offering. Honor the priest, and give him his portion, as you may have been commanded. His position on the ritual laws, however, remains uncertain. In his discussion of banquets, he urged, "Eat what is set before you, like a man." It has been suggested that this implies a dispensation from insistence on dietary laws, for the sake of good manners and consideration for one's host. But the verse continues with an admonition against chewing greedily. So the point may be that one should eat like a human being rather than like an animal. And the nature of the food itself may not be an issue. Sira never addresses the issue of dietary laws explicitly. It should be noted in any case that the fear of the Lord is never simply identified with keeping the commandments. It is a disposition that manifests itself in all aspects of a person's life. The second wisdom poem concentrates on the reward of wisdom, with a short metaphorical discussion of the process by which wisdom is acquired. As in Proverbs, to love wisdom is to love life. Some other statements in this passage are novel in the wisdom tradition. First, the pursuit of wisdom is equated with cultic service. Those who serve her minister to the Holy One or to the sanctuary. This is hardly the sentiment of a priest, as it gives the pursuit of the sage equal value with spiritual cult. There is a similar implication in the discussion of sacrifices. The one who keeps the law makes many offerings. One who heeds the commandments makes an offering of well-being. Although Sirach is careful to make clear that the righteous should offer the literal sacrifices just the same. Second, those who obey wisdom are said to judge the nations. This idea is found in an eschatological context. Eschatological context means the end times. In the Wisdom of Solomon, chapter 3. Since Sirach has no place for an eschatological judgment, the context envisaged here is uncertain. The point may be simply that those trained in wisdom will rise to positions of authority. The poem concludes with a brief discussion of the process by which wisdom is acquired, emphasizing the necessity of testing. She will torment them by her discipline until she trusts them. Wisdom is not simply a method of acquiring knowledge. It is a disciplined way of life that requires the formation of character. The third poem about wisdom also discusses the process of acquiring wisdom, but does not speak in wisdom's name. Several analogies and metaphors are used to convey the need for discipline. The student is like a farmer who plows and sows, but who must be patient if it is to reap. Wisdom is like a stone in the path, and the short-sighted fool casts it aside, and the short-sighted fool casts it aside. Finally, wisdom is compared to various restraining devices, a net, yoke, or bonds. The image of the yoke is used similarly for the teachings of Jesus in Matthew. And the yoke of the law, right? Sirach 51:26, a passage found independently at Qumran, also exhorts the disciples to put your neck under the yoke of wisdom. Another set of images describe the light of wisdom for one who perseveres. Garments of gold or purple and a crown. A crown is often a symbol of immortality, but here it represents the glory of wisdom. Sirach 6:32-37 gives more straightforward advice to the pupil. He should frequent the company of the elders and attach himself to a teacher. He should also reflect on the law of the Most High, it appears then that the student has two sources to study, at least initially. The Discourse of the Elders and the Book of the Torah. Neither is simply equated with wisdom here. Rather, they have the character of a propedeutic. Wisdom is a gift of God, over and above what one can acquire by study. It is a disposition of the mind and character, and as such, it cannot be equated with any collection of sayings or laws, although these are indispensable aids in the quest for wisdom. The fourth wisdom poem also describes the quest for wisdom in poetic images. The poem falls into two halves. The first one describes the student's quest for wisdom. The second describes wisdom's reward. Chapter 15, verse 1, which associates wisdom with the law, stands as an editorial comment by Ben Sira, repeating a recurring theme in the book. Sirach 14:20-27 has the form of a beatitude or macarism. Okay, for example, happy is the person who meditates on wisdom, a form found about 12 times in Sirach and almost as frequently in Proverbs. There is a noteworthy parallel in 4 Qumran scroll 5-5 from Qumran, which declares, "Blessed the man who attains wisdom and walks in the law of the Most High." There is probably an allusion in Sirach 14:20 to Psalm 1, which pronounces, "Blessed those who meditate on the law of the Lord," with the implication that Sirach equates wisdom with the law. Psalm 154, previously known only in Syriac but now found in Hebrew at Qumran, similarly commands those who meditate is on the law of the Most High. Sirach goes on to compare wisdom to a bride and a mother. The pursuit of wisdom has a mildly erotic connotations in Proverbs 4:6-9. While wisdom is cast as the nourishing mother in Proverbs, erotic motifs will appear more prominently in Sirach 51:13-28. Here, the imagery of peering in at the window recalls the maternal side of wisdom is expressed through the images of 10 and 3, both of which gives shelter. The association of wisdom in the Torah, for example in 15:1, is a favorite theme of Ben Sira and will find its classic expressions in chapter 24. Here we must note that it has little impact on the way in which wisdom is described. Rather, the poem continues with the images of bride and mother, but shifts from the agency of the student or suitor to that of wisdom. The imagery of food and drink in 15:3 will also be developed in Sirach 24. In the Hebrew Bible, the support of the righteous is usually the Lord. Here, wisdom acts as the surrogate of the Lord. This notion too will be developed in chapter 24. The crown is often a symbol of a blessed afterlife. Sirach's hope, however, is for an everlasting name. This is not a standard expectation in the wisdom books of the Hebrew Bible. It does not appear at all in Job or the Kohelet. According to Proverbs 10:4, the memory of the righteous is a blessing, but the name of the wicked will rot. The motive is far more prominent in Sirach. The interest reflects the heightened sense of honor and shame in Sirach's Hellenistic milieu. It appears prominently in the praise of the fathers in chapters 44-50. Right? And so, wisdom here in Ben Sira, if we can summarize, right, is actually following the law of the gods. In this case, the God is Yahweh, right? Following the law or the commandments of God. And if you follow the commandments of God, you will be guided. You will be on the straight path. Right? And so, in a sense, you receive wisdom. Right? Because you are guided by the Lord, you receive guidance. So, wisdom here basically means God's way of teaching you or showing you or rewarding you, right? For keeping, in order for you to receive this, you must keep the commandments. Right? So it doesn't talk about wisdom as part of the Godhead, or for whatever it is, become the Son, so on and so forth. Right? At least it is not implied here at all. Now there are a few other places here which I wish to read to you. Is very important, so it could be lengthy, right? I'm going to skip a few here, okay, because this one is much more prominent. Yeah, so this will be about a 3-page read. So, law and creation. This is page 57. Okay, the question of the relation between the Torah and creation is posed in Sira 24, where wisdom is identified with the law at the end of a poem that is largely concerned with creation. Okay, so this is more towards the how Christians understand wisdom. When I say Christians, like the Trinitarians, right, if they understand, right, if they even explore into this area. Most of them do not. Okay, the question of the relation between the Torah and creation is posed in Sirach 24, where wisdom is identified with the law at the end of a poem that is largely concerned with creation. There are numerous scriptural allusions in this hymn which might be taken to reflect the progress of Israel's history. The pillar of cloud in 24:4 is an allusion to Exodus, the Holy Tent, and Zion in verse 10 recall the story of David. But all of this is subsumed into the process of creation. Wisdom is said to encompass the vault of heaven. This is verse 5. After her throne was in the pillar of cloud. Right. So this is one of the statements which some Trinitarians have said, that only God's pillar is at the throne. Right. And so wisdom here is also at the throne. Right. So you get the message there. Moreover, the final establishment of wisdom in Israel is not associated here with Sinai, but with the transfer of the tabernacle to Zion. This is verse 10. The giving of the law to Moses is not singled out as a moment in this process. Even though wisdom eventually takes root in Israel, it first holds sway over every people and nation. The initial revelation of wisdom is creation itself. Right? So the initial revelation of wisdom is in creation itself. Okay? In this understanding, the law revealed to Moses was implicit in creation from the beginning. And so it is an actualization, and in brackets here, Professor Collins, the supreme actualization of the natural law. The classic expression of this point of view is in ancient Judaism. Okay? In ancient Judaism is found 2 centuries later in Philo of Alexandria. In quotation, that the cosmos is in harmony with the law, and the law with the world, and that the man who observes the law is constituted thereby a loyal citizen of the cosmos, regulating his doings by the purpose and will of nature, in accordance with which the entire cosmos itself is also administered. A similar understanding of the law is implied in Romans 1:20. Although Paul evidently did not regard all details of the law as part of the law of creation. Okay. It is easier to regard the Decalogue, the 10 Commandments, and the social laws of the Pentateuch as embodiments of natural law than to claim that the spiritual laws of Leviticus are universally valid. In practice, Sirach ignores most of the Levitical laws, but at no point does he suggest that any of the Torah is obsolete. He does not consider problems that might arise from his identification of wisdom and the law, nor does he grapple with details of the biblical stipulations. He is content to affirm in principle the general compatibility between the wisdom embedded in creation and proclaimed in Proverbs, and the wisdom of the book of Moses, the Pentateuch. The relation of the law to creation is also an issue in one of the more obviously exegetical passages in Sirach, 16:24 to 17:20. The theme of creation is touched on briefly in the preceding section, which is 15:11 to 16:23, and this is picked up in 16:26-30. Right, when the Lord created His works from the beginning, and in making them determined their boundaries. Here, the emphasis is on the order of nature, in a manner similar to Psalm 104, or closer to the time of Sirach, 1 Enoch, okay, 2:5 and 73:82. There are several allusions to Genesis, the first 3 chapters, from the beginning, and this is echoed in 16:26 of Sirach. He filled it with good things. This is 16:29. All living creatures must return to earth. This is 16:30. And confer with Genesis 3:19. Confirm is compare. Then in Sirach 17 verses 1 to 10, the focus shifts to the creation of humanity, following the order of the biblical text. Again, there are several echoes of Genesis. Human beings are granted authority and dominion over the other creatures. They are made in God's image, an idea that is explained by juxtaposition with the statement that they are given strength like that of God. Characteristically, Sirach ignores the reference to male and female in Genesis 1 to 7. The most surprising aspect of this meditation on Genesis is that it ignores the sin of Adam completely. I'm making another video about sin. Right? There's a chapter here on sin, and it's not what Paul understood sin. Sirach 25:24 ascribes the original sin to Eve. In quotation, from a woman's sin had its beginning, and because of her we all die. But this explanation of the origin of sin and death is anomalous and unsupported by anything else in Ben Sira. Okay. In chapter 17, death is not considered a punishment for sin. God limited human life from the start. Similarly, in Sirach 40 verse 1, hard work was created for everyone, and a heavy yoke is laid on the children of Adam by the decree of the Creator. In brackets, in contrast, the sin of Adam is recounted in full in Jubilees 3, a few decades later than Sirach. Sirach emphasizes that God endowed the first human beings with wisdom and understanding and showed them good and evil. There is no suggestion, however, that they were forbidden to eat from the tree of knowledge of good and evil. Instead, God allotted to them the law of life. He established with them an eternal covenant and revealed to them His decrees. Their eyes saw His glorious majesty, and their ears heard the glory of His voice. There is an unmistakable allusion here to the revelation at Mount Sinai. This is in reference to Exodus 19, chapter 19, verses 16 to 19. The law of life must be identified as the Mosaic law. Sirach 45 verse 5, in the context of the praise of the fathers, says that God gave Moses the law of life and knowledge. The designation law of life is derived from Deuteronomy, chapter 30, verses 11 to 20, where Moses tells Israel, I have set before you life and death, blessings and curses. Choose life. In the context of Sirach 17, the eternal covenant of verse 12, would also seem to refer to the Sinai covenant, although Sirach 44:18 uses this phrase for the covenant with Noah. The Mosaic Torah is called the law that endures forever in Baruch 4:1. It may be, however, that Sirach admits no distinction between the covenant of Noah and that of Moses, since he collapses the interval between the creation and the giving of the Torah. The implication of the passage is that the law of life and the attendant choice between life and death was given to humanity from the beginning. The same point is made explicitly in Sirach 15, verses 14 to 17. God made man, Adam, or Adama, means soil, in the beginning and set him in the power of his inclination. The passage continues, before each person are life and death, and whichever one chooses will be given. The sin of Adam, which Sirach does not even acknowledge, is no more significant than the sin of anyone else who breaks the law. Okay? Conversely, the law set before Adam and Eve was no different from the law given to Moses on Mount Sinai. The law of creation and the law of Sinai are one and the same. We shall find an interesting parallel to Ben Sira in this respect in a fragmentary wisdom text found in Qumran, which is the fourth Qumran scroll 4-3. It is probably significant that the content of the law is summarized here in very general terms. What 4Q mean the fourth cave of Qumran, not the fourth scroll. He said to them, beware of all evil, and he gave commandment to each of them concerning their neighbor. Marbach is probably right that we have here a form of the great commandment to love God and the neighbor, even if it's expressed weakly. The summation of the law under two main heads was typical of the Hellenistic synagogue, according to Philo. And Ben Sira may already show the beginnings of this tendency in Hellenistic Judaism. In view of the cosmic character of wisdom in Ben Sira, Marbach has suggested that the identification with the law was suggested by Stoic philosophy, where the logos or cosmic spirit could also be referred as nomos, or as the law. Zeno, the founder of Stoicism, wrote that the universal law, which is true reason, which is logos, permeating everything, is identical with Zeus, the guide of the arrangement of all things. Cleanthes, in his famous hymn, addresses Zeus as prime mover of nature, who with your law steer all things, and speaks of God's universal law. In Cicero's formulation, law is the highest reason implanted in nature, which commands what ought to be done and forbids the opposite. No Jewish writer would simply identify wisdom with the deity. No Jewish writer would simply identify wisdom with the deity. But we have seen that in Sirach 24, wisdom is described in language hitherto reserved for God. Okay? There are clear similarities between the Jewish concept of wisdom and the Stoic logos. Remember the law, right? And in philosophy, it is also the nomos, the law. Okay. There are clear similarities between the Jewish concept of wisdom and the Stoic logos, between the Jewish notion of a law given at creation and the Stoic law of nature. It is not impossible that the Stoic use of law as a cosmic principle facilitated the identification of the Torah with wisdom, since it provided a precedent for thinking of law in cosmic universal terms. The affinities, however, are far clearer in the wisdom of Solomon and Philo than they are in Sirach. who still wrote in Hebrew, okay, and could scarcely have reproduced the technical terms of Stoicism if he had wished to do so. Sira does not develop the notion of the law as a cosmic principle. There are no poems describing how Torah came forth from the mouth of God or circled the heavens before creation, like the Sophia and Yalbadoa, so on and so forth. Let me grab a drink here. The point of the identification is to accredit the Torah as a valid concretization, even as the ultimate concretization, to make it concrete, of universal wisdom, not to attribute a cosmic role to the Torah itself. The importance of nomos, or the law, in Stoic thought may have contributed to Sirach's identification of Torah and wisdom, but the analogy is not developed here. If you're familiar with this sort of discussion, it gets developed as time moves on, and all the way it gets reinterpreted. Right, wisdom early on here basically means the law. It's how is how you would receive uh, guidance from God, right? So there's similarities between the Jewish wisdom as well as the Stoic wisdom. As it progresses much later on, people started reinterpreting this wisdom, right? And then it becomes like wisdom is, eventually it becomes the Trinity, right? And so if you study the development of the doctrine of the Trinity, don't start from the 2nd century onwards, start from the Hellenistic period, right? In fact, you can go much before. How study ancient philosophy and their way of understanding their positions in this world. Right? We call it the North and the South. Right? The Italian philosophers, quote unquote Italian philosophers, they believe in God, so on and so forth. And then the non-Italian philosophers, mostly in Greece, so on and so forth, Macedonia, okay, if you can call that land, Athens, so on and so forth. They have a more skeptical approach, more atheistic approach, so on and so forth. Right? But returning to our book here, the more direct influence on Sirach probably lay in the growing authority of the Torah in the Judaism of his day. The Torah had already been associated with wisdom in Deuteronomy and the Psalms. It had been recognized and confirmed by the Seleucid king Antiochus III through the meditation of Sirach's hero, the high priest Simon. Sirach wanted to bring together the wisdom tradition inherited from Proverbs with the Torah-based wisdom of the Levitical teachers. The identification of wisdom and the law symbolize that merger of educational traditions. The identification of the wisdom implanted in creation with the law of Moses, or Moshe, has important implications for the thinking of later Jewish and Christian tradition on the subject of the natural law. In Sirach, these notions are embryonic. Okay? Embryonic or embryonic. They emerge full-fledged in Philo of Alexandria, who was thoroughly versed in Greek philosophy. The conceptualization of wisdom in Greek philosophical categories is also a prominent feature of the other major apocryphal wisdom books. The Wisdom of Solomon, right? And so, ladies and gentlemen, we have surveyed Ben Sira's wisdom. Now, there are a few other parts here that we can go and read, but perhaps I'll leave them to another video. And the chapter on original sin, chapter 5, is something that I would like to read to you as well. Okay, but that will be another video. And I would like to take this time to share with you some of the other contents of this book. Chapter 5 also has a portion on prayer and atonement, like how do you atone for your sins if you made a mistake. In later Christian tradition, the Pauline epistles mention that the only way for you to receive atonement, the only way for you to be forgiven is to accept that Jesus died for your sin. Like Paul mentions, I came to preach to you nothing except Christ and Himself crucified. Right? Again, some people say Christ and Himself crucified. The church fathers, when they were arguing about the doctrine of the Trinity, they were fighting against the modalists, or they were fighting against the one who believed that Christ and Jesus is actually separate. Right? The Docetics, they would use this passage, but they would interpret it differently as well. Right? But that is a different topic completely. Another thing that is here is the outlook. Okay, Messianism, right, in Sira. This is page 108. Messianism. This one, Messianism. And so there's also wisdom in the Dead Sea Scrolls. Right? All these are from the Hellenistic age, and all these are actually important because it shows, because all these passage or all these ideas and concepts were actually being used much later on during the Trinitarian controversy, and the church fathers of that time, they reinterpreted. Okay, and some of them obviously are anachronistic because wisdom, these are the works are which appears much earlier, and the church fathers of that time, they do not actually interpret these verses, these books, in the context of when this book was revealed, right? And so we see some anachronism here, even as early as the church fathers' age, right? So wisdom have been used to argue that Jesus is actually the wisdom, right? Or the concept of wisdom is actually that God and His wisdom is separate. So meaning the wisdom existed since eternal time and has forever existed, meaning wisdom is God. Right? And so this allows for the Trinity. Whereas we have just surveyed that in Ben Sira, wisdom basically means nomos. And this is also in Stoic philosophy. Right? And they too share similar concept because there might be some interleaves communities and so forth. Because once Hellenism takes place, ideas and cultures were exchanged. And so the Torah were actually being read through the Hellenistic lens. And this is Philo of Alexandria, which allows for deuteros theos, a second God in the Godhead. For example, in 151, Justin Martyr. And so this allows for all these sort of ideas, because all these sort of ideas are actually found in Greek philosophy. Right? And this is found in the Catholic Encyclopedia of the Bible as well. Right? And also in Life Application Bible. Right? Maybe not Life Application Bible. Some of the Bibles that I have behind me. And so, ladies and gentlemen, this is part of the Old Testament library collection by Westminster John Knox Press. And this is an entry by John J. Collins. Okay. An authority in the study of wisdom and so on and so forth. An authority in the Hebrew Bible as well. And so, ladies and gentlemen, we have to summarize here. When it comes to wisdom, it basically just refers to law, following God's commandment. In a sense, if you think about it, you follow God's commandment, meaning you are the one that has wisdom, right? but it is also interchangeable. You need to follow God's commandment in order for you to have wisdom. Right? And so people would see that you have wisdom, therefore you follow God's commandment. But actually, it's the other way around. You follow God's commandment so that you receive wisdom, right? So that you will be guided, so on and so forth. And so there's no concept, no ideas, whatever, that wisdom is part of the Trinity, part of the second God, so on and so forth. Right? At least in the literatures that we have looked at, which is Ben Sira. Right? And so, ladies and gentlemen, I'll leave you to that. Assalamu alaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.